Welcome to She Blaze, where we're bringing you cannabis culture from a woman's point of view. And as always, here to elevate the cannabis industry. I'm one of your hosts, Ice Dawson, CannabisSocialite.
And I am Dasheeda Dawson, the WeedHead.
Hi, sis. Hey, sis. Hey, sis.
Hey, sis.
On today's episode of She Blaze, Election Day is 17 days away. When is the last time you learned about American government? Well, get your civic life with She Blaze and our guest, Imani Dawson, because we're taking you to school.
Oh, hey. Well, of course, you know, we kick things off with the high of the week. And if it isn't obvious to you, our high of the week is that we get to do a show with our sister. We got to welcome Imani Dawson. Hey, round of applause.
Go,
Imani,
sis,
please.
Woo!
Days.
And just think, I didn't even have to pay you guys to say that. I'm so touched.
Oh my God.
Maybe I'll pay you later. It's a pleasure to be here. I think you guys are doing great work in the cannabis space. In addition to being the oldest member of our sister unit, I am a communications expert with 20 years of experience in media. I've worked in print, I've worked in television, I've worked in the digital space, and now I'm working in political communications. And I'm working in advocacy where I get to meet up with you fine ladies and help advocate for a more equitable cannabis space.
Yes. Well, we all wear so many different hats in the industry. So Imani, of course, is being modest because, you know, we as a sister group, we also have our sister Vita. Shout out to Vita. MJM Strategy really was born, right? And the success that we saw was a collaboration of all of our skill set. So anytime you saw us in media, anytime you're reading about the WeedHead, anytime you're reading something maybe that the WeedHead has said or is written, Imani is really that voice that kind of keeps us, you know, communicating appropriately. Sometimes we go a little bit off the script though, which we're going to do today, okay?
Yeah,
always
that's been for decades, so I'm used to it. Yeah. But yes, thank you for bolstering it. It's a pleasure being in this space, talking to people, engaging with people. That's really what I do and what I love to do. And I'm excited to talk about civic engagement because we need everybody out here right now.
Like right now.
Like now. Like okay. On your shirt now.
No, that's right. And I mean, you've been an activist for years. So, you know, you are well seasoned in this game and you probably got a lot of tips and tricks you could give our listeners and followers.
Even though I know that's your code for old, and that's fine. Yes, I have been in the talk about it, be in the streets. Be in the faces of the people in power, claim your power space for a while. So I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yes, well, we are doing things a little bit different today in that we actually have a presentation because we wanted to make sure that even though we are having great conversation and it will be great, but we wanted to make sure folks are able to at least follow along if you are watching us on Facebook Live. Now, if you're listening to us, you might want to head over to theweedhead.com. The She Blaze page has all of the videos so that you can check this out as well if you want to see the presentation.
Yes, ma'am. You also have the presentation available for download as well because Dasheeda is like a presentation wizard. So when y'all look at this presentation, y'all, it is gonna look real fancy smashy. Okay.
Yes, I suggest downloading it and reviewing it before you step in the ballot box on November 3rd, and make sure you step in the ballot box on November 3rd. Message.
Agreed. That's going to be the overwhelming message. We want people to get your civic life. And I think it's so funny because, you know, I work for the Office of Community and Civic Life. And so one of the things why I was like, we got to do a presentation is because, like you said, Ice, most folks have not learned this since, like, I know for me, it was Sesame Street. Like, we were doing, learning about government, okay?
Well, I don't know about your school, but I at least got a little civics in the 8th grade. Shout out to Spence. They wanted us to know it, I guess, for coffee table conversations and dinner table conversations. So, yes. And shout out to my 8th grade teacher, Miss Blumley.
That's so cute.
And I feel like I did learn about American government. My last time was probably in high school. It's a 9th grade class. But I will say that, American government, American history, they love putting a little spin on it. And so you never really know what's true in some of those books, especially if you went to public school.
Okay, so let's get into it.
Yes,
we're trying to just spit what the truth is. And I think mostly what we're going to be talking about is how folks can get involved. So like I said, we actually have a presentation today. Ice, let's get into it out the gate. I want to make sure we know what we're going to cover.
Yes. And we have some key points that we want you guys to take away from our presentation and our workshop today. That's why we're also going to be going a little bit longer as well. So we really want you guys to familiarize yourself with local, state, and federal government structures. It is really common that in election year, people think, oh my God, the president, but it goes way deeper than that. So we'll let you know how deep it really goes. We want to highlight opportunities for you guys to support your lawmakers and regulators with the current initiatives that they have going on, especially around cannabis legalization and regulation, because that is one of the most important things during the voting process, because it allows the people to get a say in what they want with cannabis. And then our last final takeaway is we want to describe important steps towards creation and adoption of model legal legislation. Now, a lot of people, or a lot of states, I would say, have joined together their forces to create their own cannabis progression. And so we're going to look at ways they've done that.
That's so true, yes. But that model legislation, listen, that is the truth, because there are a lot of states that want to act like they do not know what to do, a lot of municipalities. And when you have that means you're like, oh, you don't know what to do? Slide it right over. This is what you do. Okay.
Sometimes you gotta write your own laws.
Sometimes you do. And that's why that's so important. All right. So yeah, I'm pushing the slide forward for the folks that are listening to us. We're going to jump right into this first hot topic.
Yes, ma'am. And it is all about our government structure. As we've said before, voting, elections, it gets real deep past federal. So federal, yes, you're looking at members of Congress that represents the people's interest in Washington. The Senate, that's the House, and the Senate is broken up into two. Besides the president. So it's really important you look at your House representatives and your Senate for your state.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if Imani has any insights here, but one of the things I will say is that once you understand that the three branches, the executive, which in some ways is like the CEO, because I come from the business world, so I think about what that person has the decision making to do. All things kind of roll up to the CEO of a business. And trust and believe, government is business. It's public business, in fact, and it's your business because people own the government. I've been saying that for the last 6 months since I've been in a government role. But people are not paying enough attention beyond the 4 years. I feel like folks are on autopilot. So when you look at the government structure, you want to identify how often you actually have to vote for something. So like, for example, a perfect example in Congress is that seat is only 2 years, right, in Congress. And so what does that mean? That means that there's a non-presidential election year that probably more than half of the country is not paying attention, right?
Wow.
And then people are able to stay in their seat. You get people who are 14 years a member of Congress. That means they went through 7 terms, uncontested in many cases, and sometimes not even living within the jurisdiction that they're overseeing, because in 14 years, some things don't change. So I just want to make
years is like just getting started for a lot of these people. How long Chuck Grassley been sitting up in the Senate?
I mean, how long Mitch McConnell been leading this? You know what I'm saying? What we talking about?
Before his neck looked like a turkey, I'm sure.
I mean, definitely before I was born.
Well, listen, this is what we're talking about. Exactly. I don't know the number. And I think what I'd like to stress here is that even at the federal level, but starting at rather, you want to look at all of the different areas and see who is impacting who. How does the Senate right now, for example, impact what's happening in the judiciary, right? Quite heavily, right? I don't know if folks are following, but we're in a situation right now where our federal arm of government has a bit of a potential shakeup, and we're starting to see how everything is connected. So who your senators are essentially will also in some ways potentially impact how the judiciary branch is built, right?
Yes, ma'am. There's actually this last week I was watching it as they were trying to bring on a new justice, and so I mean the shade of it all. Really, the things they said is really important, and now we really don't see this often where they bring on a justice right before election.
Definitely not in the way that it has been. And I feel like that's the reason why everybody got to get their civic life, because some folks are real confused. Go ahead, Imani.
All right. I was going to say that to say that this is an unprecedented year is an understatement. I'm sure everybody watching is clutching their chest like, what now? And, you know, there is no rationale or justification for pushing through a justice, particularly one that's supposed to be in, you know, in this, I don't know if in the spirit of Ruth Bader Ginsburg is the right term, or like the polar opposite, but pushing someone through with, you know, less than a month remaining in a before an election is, as far as I know, unprecedented, and it also flies in the face of the rationale for not holding hearings to confirm Merrick Garland in 2016. So it's just sort of feels like right before the apocalypse. And I don't want to get too political on here because I know y'all are peace, love, and grass. So we won't go into the Handmaid's Tale and the confirmation hearings, but I will just say that to your point, Dasheeda, what's going on now and the kind of clearly not representing the interests of the people that we've seen on both sides throughout government is a prime reason for people to be paying attention now. And I also just wanted to quickly say something about local government, because we've been talking a lot about federal and state.
Yep.
But this, first of all, shout out to your charts because they are so lovely. I'm just admiring the charts. Everyone take a moment of silence for the charts right here. So this is a great representation of what government looks like, but it's important for people to know on the local level that it may be slightly different. Not every location has a city council. You may not even live in a city, right? You could be in a rural area. So it's important that people know what their local government looks like. And this is a model we're using. We're using New York City. Shout out to NYC. Some of us holding it down. Other people, going to different states, and
we was out.
Want to stay in the rotten apple, and hold down old Brooklyn. But yes, we here in New York City have a city council that represents the people, but you could be in New Hampshire and have a select board. So, your mileage may vary. And that's why it's important to really be familiar with your government.
I would also just piggyback. That's perfect, Imani, segue, because we're going to go into showing a little bit more of each structure. But I would piggyback and say, if you are familiar that there is going to be an executive branch and there's going to be a judiciary branch and a legislative, even at the local level, you will be able to pinpoint and find the corresponding, right? And again, like not every city has a council in the same way. New York City Council is quadruple the size of Portland. It's only 5, and it includes the mayor. So there's a lot to be learned when you actually think about it on the local level, but it does help to orient yourself, because sometimes if you're not, you're like thinking someone has some control and they don't, right? So at the end of the day, if you're trying to get something where it requires budgetary changes on the federal level, guess what? The executive branch owns that. On the state level, guess what? The governor and the executive office owns that. And on the local level, typically, if that's the mayor, that executive owns that. If you're trying to figure out what's going on with your police bureau, police department, or anything that's around the departments, period, in the federal level, Department of Justice, Agriculture, that all goes under the executive branch. And so there's a hierarchy, and it does translate itself to the local level, but it does require you to kind of sometimes feel your way through and really see what the nuances are for your city or your township.
Absolutely, because if there was, not saying it will be, if there was to be an apocalypse, you're gonna want your state to break apart real quick. So you gotta know who.
I just like, I'm not saying there's an apocalypse, but I'm saying my go bag is packed and I'm already doing survival training.
I'm just saying, if you want to go into the woods, hopefully your state will hold it down just in case it is an apocalypse on the federal level. But yes,
get your machete ready, girl, just in case.
Hey, I mean, listen, we have no promises right now. We do try to keep nonpartisan, but let's be clear, there may not be a nice transfer of power. Just in case there isn't, you gonna want your governor to have your back. Really quickly, the governor also signs and veto bills. So a lot of times, as far as cannabis, we've seen bills get stalled at the federal level, obviously. But as far as state, there are quite a few legal states, and it is because the state took ownership of wanting to progress legalization forward.
No, that's a great point. I don't want to take anything away from my governor, Andrew Cuomo, who's currently America's gubernatorial hero, but he has been kind of a holdout when it comes to equitable legalization in New York. So before he was like, let me save y'all with facts and policies that actually keep people alive, he was kind of like, oh, y'all want to legalize and have a percentage of revenue set aside for communities most harmed. Let's take that back to the drawing board.
Right. I mean, you're absolutely right. He's not perfect, and no one is, but that's also why we got to be paying attention and why we're here and why we keep telling folks to get your civic life. Because one, these roles are temporary. The resources, the revenue, the roles, the rules, they're all owned by the people. I'm gonna keep saying it over and over again. You're gonna hear me like a broken record. But of course, as we move forward in some of our slides, we're trying to take deeper dives. This is an actual visualization of what the federal government looks like. And as you can see, the print is like hella small. And so what I'm telling you is that there's a lot of moving pieces. And what you need to do is get into it. Literally take that magnifying glass and start putting some fine print over what's happening. Again, we've been on autopilot, I feel, as a people every 4 years or down the party lines. And what we realize, and you should, especially I now know traveling across America and living in so many different cities, is that you really need to be voting in the people, irregardless of their party, based on how their policies sit and what they actually control, right? Because sometimes we're voting on the things that don't really affect our day to day as much as we, care about the president, because they're the ultimate representation of the United States. Most of what happens on the presidential level is not going to immediately impact your day to day. However, like I said, what's happening on the state and then on the local level, things and decisions that your mayor decides, for example, can impact your day to day. point in case. New York right now doesn't have full legalization, but New York City has banned employment drug testing for THC. It has also banned the ability for hospitals to randomly drug test, especially women. So these are the examples of things that now New York City, in some ways, theoretically, is living a different world than Buffalo or Albany or anywhere else in the New York State that has not changed. So it's just recognizing how important, even at the local level, it is to dig into the fine print.
No, I think that's really important. And I also think I just want to put a plea out there for people to really understand where their elected officials stand on the issues that are important to them. So if you are, pro legalization, you need to know how your state elected officials feel about that, as well as your local representatives, because you could have a situation like, even in New York City, where we've taken a progressive approach to like social policy around cannabis. And there are state representatives, for example, yes, I'm talking about you, State Senator Roxanne Prasad, who's
are like people out.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, if the apocalypse is coming, then let's have real talk right now.
Right.
Who's like, yes, well, people in my district are impacted, but I don't like the smell, or I'm personally opposed, so I'm going to disregard the will and the best interest of the people and just vote, because I feel like no one will vote me out.
That's the problem. You could definitely get voted out. And I see we taking a microscope to New York, but let's talk about here in the South. I'm a Southern belle at heart. And ultimately, Atlanta, during the whole COVID thing, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Bottoms shut down Atlanta, while the governor was saying, no, actually, COVID is fine. I did not read anything that said it should be shut down. We need masks, so those are sometimes your local.
Are people dying?
Yes.
Question mark. Sometimes locally you are very progressive, and then you see that your state is slow snails behind, and it then allows you to know, maybe this governor who can't read that well shouldn't be the governor, and you should look at some of the local people that are starting to come up in the ranks to see what type of positions would work well for them at the time, especially during these elections.
Well,
that's so true.
Actually, prevent him from stealing another election.
Well, you got voter suppression is real, and we didn't even get into that because we could have 2-3 hours on voter suppression. Okay, honey, of 2-3 hours.
Especially in places like Georgia. Don't get us started. But what I think you did say is, as we show more structure, this one is an example of Texas, a really large state with a relatively large government structure. You can actually help move people from their positions into more, influential positions. So, for example, we just talked about Congress being only 2 years. And I don't know. I like to get promoted. Like, just that's me. So it's one of those things where I couldn't see myself being in Congress at the same level, if you will, for 14 years. And therefore, that's like 7 times I could have possibly made a shift or got promoted. I'm going to get promoted. And I think that the will of the people ultimately decide that. And so that's where you start to understand the structure. You can say, well, this person is doing such a great job here that they may actually be, really instrumental elsewhere within the government, or with more power or a higher level of the same type of work. Someone on city council may be better for the Congress, right? And I just think that no one thinks that way from the public's perspective. You expect, okay, well, let these politicians do whatever they want. It's their career, but it's our government. And so I just think it's important for us to know those levers that we can push and pull when we want to move people the way we need them to be moved.
Absolutely. And so, sorry. What were you saying, Imani? Sorry.
I was just going to agree with Dasheeda, and I was going to say that what often happens also is that people lose faith in the political process. And so they are, they elect somebody who's run on this platform of what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And it doesn't always jibe with what they actually do. And then because of turnout, because, you know, people get frustrated with the political process and they just throw their hands up like whatever, it's, you know, it's all a setup, and it certainly could feel that way. If you're not voting, you're not participating, and you're not holding your representatives accountable, which means that they can be constantly reelected on some low turnout type type voting situations, where ultimately the only people that they are accountable to are their big money donors.
Absolutely. And I think you make some great points. Obviously, we're showing listeners and our fellow watchers that we all real opinionated in the Dawson family. And if we have an opinion, we will chat over each other. So if you're listening, just know we are really passionate. But I think Dasheeda and Imani make some great points. And it is time to move to our next section, because we want to show the people why the government serves you and works for you, and what you guys can do to make sure that the government is actually serving you currently. And that is really all about, you know, yes, we have voting, but we can lobby too.
Yes. And, you know, part of why we even started this concept of Get Your Civic Life is because during a She Blaze episode, ICE was basically like, well, lobbying is the new protest. And, you know, for me, I was like, truer words have never been spoken. A lot of people are really confused about what to do after the protest. We get that a lot. Now what? You know, how has this helped? We knew that after summer, some folks, our allied folks, usually we're going to be fatigued of what oppression feels like, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. And so we are in a situation now where there isn't a next step. And what we're saying is this might be your next step. And as sisters who have lobbied together, I think me, again, taking it to the business standpoint, I wanted to break down the different ways that lobbying is actually defined, because you can get yourself into some trouble if you don't know. But at the same time, I think people also assume that they could get into trouble, and so then they stay out of the opportunities that they should participate in. So let's just break it down a little bit. And I don't know, do y'all want me to do the definition of the federal one?
Well, you know, you might as well. You the numbers and cents person in the family.
The numbers and cents. Yes, I hopefully. But yeah, so federal lobbying is actually defined, and it's defined from a actual bill, a Lobbying Disclosure Act of 1995. So it's not that old, but it is old enough, going on 30 years. Okay. That basically we've known that we have a specific type of lobbying, federal lobbying, that is defined by oral, written, email communication made to executive or legislative branch officials, right? Really at any level. And the key thing here is that you had to have done those things on behalf of a client, and as an individual who is either employed or retained for financial compensation, or something that can be valued in a compensation. So the key thing is client and getting paid. And so if you are lobbying to any, like the president's office, departments that roll up to the president's office, that big old long chart that we just saw, same thing when you look at state and at the local level, if you're making that effort on behalf of a company, on behalf of even your own company, you have to just understand that there's a potential that you are a lobbyist, and you definitely need to be registered as such. And part of the reason is because the United States, and it says that in bold on the bottom of this slide, is one of the few countries in which legislative lobbying is a major strategy of interest groups. So what do we mean by that? We talked about it on She Blaze. ICE brought all the receipts when we were talking about our cannabis buying power on the Hill. And honestly, we don't have any. Why? Because we spent $2 million on this official federal lobbying, while pharmaceutical companies are spending more like $140 million, right? So this is a real way that government is being moved through lobbying, strategic lobbying to the tune of $100+ million poured into individuals and companies and firms that are meant to basically speak on behalf of a client to get the laws as they'd like them to be.
Well, you make some great points. I mean, it really just shows how much of capitalism runs our country ultimately, because basically you get paid to push initiatives that you may not even believe in, right? So that's the craziest part, that a lobbyist gets paid to push an initiative that has nothing to do with them. And we spit some real facts about cannabis buying power, because, I mean, there are a lot of cannabis companies that are paying a lot of money to get on different Congresses, I would say, really get on their radar, but we still see no movement, nothing passed. And it's crazy. They also have lobbyists at the state level as well.
There are lobbyists
every level.
At the local level, there are lobbyists at every level. I definitely don't want to derail the conversation. I'm good for that, for taking a point and being like, tell them why you're really mad, son. But the reality is that American government is very transactional, and this sort of legal lobbying is the reason why people can pay to have their influence wielded with the executive branch, with legislators, with the judiciary branch. Like, this is, thanks to Citizens United, companies get to be, have a vote to really throw unlimited amounts of capital into influencing our politics, which is, in my opinion, why much of it doesn't reflect the real will of the people. If you talk to folks on a one-on-one basis, right, and you see how people are legislating and what gets passed, you're like, where's the disconnect? And it comes here. And I'm sure Dasheeda's about to make this segue, because we don't have to just sit back and take it. Ultimately, I think until we reverse like a Citizens United and get so much money out of politics, it's going to be a problem. But we can also make our voices heard as part of the electorate, as constituents, because we could be like, okay, well, it's nice that you got all this money, but this is how we feel. And if you don't vote out in alignment with our interests, we'll vote you out.
Yes, we will vote you out. And I mean, we are seeing grassroots lobbying at every level, from your city to your state to the federal. But I think we've seen it as far as cannabis, really grassroots lobbying at the state level, because, again, a lot of states have passed progressive cannabis legislation in the last couple of years, even though it's still federally illegal.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's interesting just to think about how we as people have to kind of think more like the businesses, right? As we approach lobbying, not only do you getting paying for an individual to go in, like I said, who maybe doesn't believe this, but their job is to communicate it to the best of their ability. Imani could definitely speak to that. They come in with very well crafted one-pagers and a lot of flyers and paperwork that is easily adopted by your lawmakers, right? Until we change who's in office, you got to work with who's in office, and oftentimes the simpler the better. And so they come in fully strapped with all of those type of a collateral for folks to use for recall, right? And I think where we struggle is that there's no budget associated with that necessarily when you are in the grassroots. And so it's why it's so important to work in a coalition, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But when we think about advocacy and activism lobbying, right, the lobby day is the community gathering, right, of influence. And what we've done is we try to do it, around days to make it so that people can leverage economies of scale. If we're all doing it, then it's less cost. Someone hopefully has led the information gathering and putting together the collateral, so everyone has on the same, shirts or the same things that they're handing out. it's more impactful. But it doesn't mean that has to be the only time, right? Mm-hmm. It can be whenever, actually, as long as these lawmakers are in session. And so the goal, ultimately, whenever you're trying to lobby as an individual, is that you want to meet with and educate. And I put educate in large capital letters because more often than not, especially in cannabis, lawmakers do not know anything about cannabis other than what we have been taught, which is that it's, the devil's lettuce. And that's obviously far from the truth, especially as the federal government has a patent, which I might add. So most people, even that piece of information, a lawmaker, a government official, not knowing that the federal government has a patent, it's a game changer in the way that they're willing to listen at that point. So they're uncovering and they're being re-educated too. The other thing is that this is the way initiatives move forward. Ultimately, if you did get to a model legislation that you created, this is how you get that to the right people. Through lobbying, meeting several lawmakers. You may find that you started with one that you feel you have as the inside, but they are just really a conduit to the right person that you want to get your information to. So you really want to see it as building blocks or building a bridge to the influencers within government. And then last but not least, I think this is where the individual voices and stories are heard. So this is what lobbyists don't have generally, although smart lobbying firms do curate stories, if you will. But basically, you bringing your own story. I'm a cannabis patient, for example. So when I go in to speak with a lawmaker, especially a lawmaker that is Black or brown, I let them know right away that I am a cannabis patient and user. And oh, by the way, I'm also an award-winning executive strategist, author, and the list goes on. And a molecular biologist. That's usually when it shuts down and they like, what can you tell me today? But that's what our job is as the
I'm sure they quickly learned that what they can tell you is nothing because
you are so right. Because we know,
I do know. No, I'm just joking. But the fact of the matter is, most of I found the story is what is compelling, and then once I'm able to get in with a story, now I can start laying on the data, laying on the facts, and getting the information that they need to make a solid decision.
Can I take a second to sorry, Ice. I feel like I'm playing double dutch and I'm just gonna jump in here real quick. Okay. I just want to acknowledge some of the great comments that we've gotten. I think you're right, Dasheeda, that it's important to acknowledge that we can use our collective voices, but I've seen a couple of comments just talking about, the pay to play nature of where they are. Like I saw something that said Miracle Grows has investing heavily in lobbying. For my high of the week was the fact that it looks very likely that adult use is going to pass in New Jersey, which will put some nice pressure on New York because two of our neighbors will be legal states. And then there was a woman named Larissa Bolivar who commented about the fact that in order to get social equity passed in Colorado, she had to hire a Republican lobbyist. And spend thousands of dollars. So I think it's good for context for people to know exactly what they're going up against when it comes to lobbyists. So it's, that just underscores the fact that you really got to be strategic when you're doing your own advocating, getting to know your elected official and, letting them know how you feel on the issues and not being afraid to take to the street. On the activism side, if being an advocate and going in there politely doesn't work. I know that has definitely moved the dial in New York, particularly around renting laws here, and also around policing. New York City.
That's so true. That is so true. Can I also add real quick, Ice, that I know
the baby sis part is really coming out today, you guys.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, sorry.
Y'all should feel bad. Can we get some tears in the comments? No,
oh my god!
No, go ahead.
I love what Larissa's saying because it's so true. It's strategy. So when you're working as someone who is in the industry, and you want your business, but you're in maybe the more smaller business aspect of it, yes, join a coalition, participate in those lobby days, but do not be afraid of within the coalition calling to action, us everybody putting money on the table so that you can also hire a lobbying firm. There are just many different ways to skin a cat. Again, oftentimes your story may only resonate within a certain subsegment, but you need everybody to be on board. And one of the things I love about cannabis is that it's a universal topic, right? At this point, I'm working on both sides, if you will, and I'm educating on both sides. And so, yeah, I agree that we've got to just be very strategic. It isn't one thing or the other. Oftentimes, it's one thing leads to the other, and just knowing what the spectrum is between the two.
Yeah, no, Larissa just noted. I'm sorry, Ice. Go ahead.
It's fine. Keep going. I'm just here. I'm looking beautiful though, so that's all that matters.
That's right. You real cute, girl. I'm not just saying that because you stole like 90% of my face either. So Larissa actually just said that she started as an activist and that there is some finesse that needs to happen here. So first of all, thank you to everybody who's adding to the conversation and adding their comments. And two, yes, you, to Dasheeda's point, these are tools. We got to use every tool in the toolbox if we want to affect the changes that we know our cities and states need and deserve.
Absolutely.
Okay, let me jump in. Okay, just kidding. So yeah, you guys make a really great point. A lot of times as far as cannabis, you start as an activist and you notice once people hear your stories, once what they hear you do, these big companies love to come in and pluck you out and be like, well, since you're really into cannabis, you should come work for us. And sometimes that means special interest lobbying versus you no longer being an advocate or trying to balance out special interest lobbying and being an advocate. So what does some of that look like?
Well, you actually just pulled up an opportunity, right? So this is one of the things I talk about in How to Succeed in the Cannabis Industry, the workbook that is available on Amazon, Target.com, Barnes & Noble, and the ebook on the WeedHead.com. But if you get into this industry as an activist and you have a strong story, you are able to deliver it well. You've crafted that and it is making an impact on your local and state levels. Yes, oftentimes you can transition into lobbying. And by that, I mean being a paid lobbyist because you now understand government probably better than the private equity firm that wants their marijuana company to do well. You understand who are the really big players and you can charge people for it. But that's why it's so important for us to understand the difference between that lobbyist, the advocate, and the activist. So the trajectory may be that you came in, you're a veteran activist, right? And I always use Leo as a Bridgewater as an example, as he just won, Advocate of the Year in the cannabis space this past year. So he went from an activist mode to becoming a full-fledged advocate. And I ain't trying to put his business out there, but certainly I know people want to hire him to come and bring his story more formally and lobby on behalf of particular bills, some of which we'll probably talk about as it pertains to veterans. But when you're a lobbyist, you get paid directly to push the initiative. And hopefully, if this is done well, and if you are crossing over well and planning out your own trajectory, you're getting paid to push the initiatives that mean something to you. So that not only makes you a lobbyist, but it makes you a freaking good lobbyist as well, because you actually are behind it full-fledged. You can be fully authentic as you push it. That's not always the case, like I said, but you need to know those legal restrictions.
Well, you can be a lobbyist, or you could also get your cash together for your, through your coalition or whatever, make some pies and some cakes, have some bake sales that work for Mary McLeod Bethune, get your money together and hire a lobbyist that's already connected to the legislative structure in your respective town and get what you need to get done. So you got options.
That's very true.
Yes, ma'am. Well, you guys make some great points, and these great pictures show that you guys have been lobbying. Just so you know, I was there. I just didn't have.
I took the picture.
Basically, let people know. But I'm so excited because we've actually seen a lot of progress as far as lobbying, but we've also seen a lot of regular people say, hey, I could be a part of the government too. And with that, we've seen regular people that don't necessarily have a government background run for offices, local, state, and federal.
Yeah, no, that's I just said this on a conversation on Facebook. I had to weigh in. Shout out to cannabis friend and ally, and also an author, Jay Mills. But she always has some pretty deep conversation on her page. And what I've found is that we've been having a real deep one, especially Black and brown folks, as it pertains to boycotting government or boycotting 45, right? And I don't know, now that I, again, have gone from contracting with government on the outside and trying to get my civic life as an advocate and as lobbying and the like, to actually working for government, I cannot say even any stronger that government belongs to the people, and boycotting government is like boycotting your own business, which I feel would be dumb. Boycott private sector, they actually do own that, but we own this, and I think Black and brown folks need to get more aggressive about that. And that means really actually looking at potentially running, even when you didn't go to the Kennedy School of Government, because let's be real, and I'm not throwing no shade, but I am, there are some people who've gone to the Kennedy School of Government and they are struggling in their current positions.
Absolutely. And we just have to remember, the government works for us, the people. They serve us. And last time I checked, if you serving somebody, you can't tell somebody what to do without knowing what they need. So,
I really don't want nobody to tell you what to do. Stop trying to send that messages to everything.
Okay, maybe that's
tell me what to do.
That is
wanted to quickly. Where's the lie though? I wanted to quickly shout out some regular folks that we know that happen to be in our circle that are running for office and are positioned to take office. One is Bridgeport. So Dasheeda and I were in Prep for Prep. Shout out to all the prep school Negroes out there that participated in the modern version of busing and got a school ties type education. So Jabari Bridgeport is a Prep for Prep alum. He is poised to be the state senator here in my district. He was a teacher. He was a private citizen who decided that his community deserved better and he could do better. And so he is running unopposed. He won the Democratic primary. It was an upset in our district. And he is running unopposed for the general ticket in November. So he about to be my state senator. And then there is another Prep for Prep alum who is poised to be our first Congress member. His name is Rick Krajewski, and he is running unopposed to represent West Philly. He's also a UPenn alum. So if I could dance, this is where I will put my dance, but as a rhythmless person, I'll just stop. So yes, this is definitely a moment for people to take governance into their own hands and know that anybody can do it and that change starts with you.
Thank you so much for the shout outs, Imani, because that's like real life, regular folks. And I use in quotes, meaning that they did not necessarily intend to have a career in government or in politics, if you will, policy. We've outlined on this slide here all of the things that you really need to know. First things first, I would say go ahead and check out Knock Down the House. It's very inspiring, the Netflix movie. If nothing else, you will learn how difficult it can be for a regular person, but the ways that you persevere. And a lot of it is about community building and networking, but also some of it is about just understanding the qualifications. There are so many rules and so many little politricks, as we say, that keep regular folks out of it. And one of the first things I learned is that when you're getting your voter signatures, for example, here we have obtained voter signatures, you need to get a lot more than what they say you need, because they have all these different reasons that they get thrown out. And without having enough voter signatures to the number, you won't won't even be on a ballot. And so there's just little tricks like that the movie does highlight. And I think they did a good job also getting us excited about some of the up and coming folks or the regular people that are, are trying to pursue changes in the government. But really quickly, qualifications to run at a general level, you want to meet age and residency requirements. And the residency requirements is real, y'all, but also recognize that a lot of places don't have the residency requirements. So that might be something you might want to look into. Register as a candidate, which means you're letting everybody else know that you're interested. So you can't keep it like stealth-like and then appear. And then you want to go in front of usually your city clerk or a municipality clerk to identify yourself as a candidate. Usually they'll say what you need. Usually it's voter signatures. And again, you want to get more. Run a campaign, meaning you're getting that community. And even on the smallest level, we feel like an average cost is about $15K. And so we do know that that's not necessarily regular person money, but you can, if you're interested, be very strategic about how you save it so that you can do it. It's like, do you want a car, save for a car, or do you want to?
Well, it's also, it could come into barter. If you work with someone that really believes in your campaign and they also own a print shop and they do creatives, boom, maybe they're willing to donate flyers. A lot of times we hear about with different campaigns that they're donated money or donated this and donated that. But for a regular person, sometimes it may not be a donation of money and it may be a donation of services.
That's so true.
I think people are really hungry for elected officials that represent their interests, that aren't, doing the kind of doublespeak, the political doublespeak that we hear from people that maybe have been, in office for a while, become jaded, dealing with whatever. So I've had the privilege of working on 2 regular people campaigns that one is the communications director for Mayor Sean Patterson Howard when she launched her historic campaign in Mount Vernon, and became the first Black woman elected to mayoral office in the entire county of Westchester. Which was incredible. She just was a private citizen that was like, Mount Vernon can do better. And I want to help lead that change. And before that, she had worked in as an executive in human services, which is also the field, and community activism, which is also the field that our mother was in for much of her life. And I also did work on Jabari Bridgeport's campaign in a communications role. So it is amazing how people really respond when you have an authentic message, when you're genuinely engaging, when you're listening and you are reflecting their real needs and issues.
That's true. I mean, basically, being authentic is whether it's in marketing a product or yourself or your campaign is like key right now. People do not want folks faking the funk. That being said, though, sometimes authenticity, as Imani would say, probably needs to be still curated, and media training is important. We talk about all the time because we keep it real on She Blaze, and then sometimes I watch back, I'm like, okay, maybe we should have said that, but it's true. You want to make sure you're still coming across as your real person. Some places that can help you get started is to start small, think big. Start small, act fast. That's my motto. So some of the common places to get started, you can run for local positions like the city council, which is actually fairly big on a local level, but there's community, city, or town commissions, boards, literally like an educational board, maybe your first time running for something. I've got a couple people in my circle, regular folks, just moms who are like, listen, moms with Princeton and Harvard degrees. Shout out to Danielle DePente. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that she decided, hey, I have 3 sons. I want to make sure that they're going to be in an educational system, a public system that is going to be quality in my neighborhood. So, Actually,
Yes, they have, you can run for local positions, or you also can do the Imani route and join and become a support with the organization or the campaign, because there's actually a lot of different organizations coming online that are trying to get some changes in the government as well. Some of them are Justice for Democrats, Brand New Congress, which your girl, I'm looking at, Gen Z GOP, and the American Majority. Now, some of these are partisan, but there are also bipartisan organizations as well.
Or nonpartisan as well. So yes, so much that we can get into, but I don't know. Looking at the time, I think we might need to get ourselves into what our main topic is for today, right?
Yes, especially since it's Dasheeda and Imani featuring Ice. So I guess we can go ahead and get into the main topic.
Okay, I'm sorry. Maybe you need to let Ice give us permission to move on.
I don't know. Probably not. I definitely never get final say in real life either, you guys. So don't feel bad. But the cannabis advocacy is really, really important because, there are quite a few states that are voting on cannabis right now. And this is really important. I think it's pretty dope, too, that states are voting on cannabis, because it's actually letting the people decide, hey, we're tired of listening to y'all about what cannabis should or shouldn't be, and it's time to listen to us. We've gotten some education, we've gotten some facts, and here is what we're going to do.
This is true. And so our main topic today is going to take you through what's happening with Cannabis Advocacy 2020. You want to get yourself up to speed very quickly. And again, a lot of people who are watching us, whether you're on Minorities for Medical Marijuana page, checking out Dasheeda Dawson and WeedHead, odds are you try to cross over into the industry. And so you're thinking about it from an entrepreneurial perspective. I got to tell you, whatever business you're trying to do, if it's cannabis adjacent, if it's in cannabis, if you're just trying to invest, at the end of the day, you cannot do that successfully without being an advocate first. And so what we're going to share is absolutely going to be very, very important. I think the first thing we start with, though, is acknowledging that there are national cannabis advocacy organizations, like maybe not so much 5 years ago when we joined the industry. In fact, I was thinking about starting one, but these organizations have been around for a long time, like Drug Policy Alliance, or more recently, but at least the bulk of the last 5 to 10 years, as it specifically pertains to cannabis. And rather than reinventing the wheel, we feel very strongly that we're not going to be able to get much done if we try to boil the ocean that way. We've got to really pour into the organizations that exist. Now, here's what I will say, though, is don't just come in and think that they're going to lay it all out for you. You got to be coming in ready to work. And maybe your first leadership position is going to happen within some of these organizations, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's pretty cool because we've partnered with a few of these organizations along the lines, especially DPA or Drug Policy Alliance. Sorry. It's a leader. It focuses on drugs in general, but it has a really warm place in its heart for marijuana.
Well, for obvious reasons. Well, at first, I got to shout out the new executive director, Cassandra Frederick. She's Black Girl Magic working, because this is a woman that started as an intern with the Drug Policy Alliance 10 years ago, and now is the executive director. Okay. Yes. And she has a very strong voice, not just about, drug decriminalization globally, but within the cannabis legalization movement as the former director of the New York office. And, a lot of what we've gotten done in New York is really due to her leadership and her vision, and really pointing out many of the things that I think, let's be real, some of the white-led organizations are missing, because they don't realize what's happening with Black and Brown communities beyond just the initial arrest or detainment or incarceration. There's all these other collateral damages that happen to the individual, the community that they live in, their family, etc. And so what I love about DPA is that it's always been a holistic approach. I also got to give a shout out to Melissa Moore, who is is someone we work with a lot in New York, also within DPA. But these other organizations are also doing things on the ground, and they're great resources as well if you're trying to get started somewhere in a state that's still crickets on the cannabis issue.
I literally, and there are different organizations popping up every day. I feel like, honestly, it's how it's even happening in different things. But on a federal level, we may have not seen a lot of movement as far as cannabis, but there are still like initiatives being actively pursued.
There's a lot. In fact, I worry a little bit when I look at some of our resources that we dive into for She Blaze. There's so many. Like if you put the word cannabis or marijuana in the search function on congress.gov, you're going to get a ton of bills, but you really do need to understand what bills are really meant to pacify or soothe the pharmaceutical industry or the private prison industry. Those are ones that have been opposing cannabis legalization, save for places that they can get in. Versus some of the bills that we've listed here are initiatives that we feel are more for the good of the total industry, patient included, consumer included, and also factor in the social justice issues that we've got to talk about when we talk about cannabis legalization. Like you cannot legalize cannabis when it's been prohibited for 80 years and disproportionately basically implemented for where Black and brown folks have been the ones that have largely been impacted. It's a mess. So real quick.
It is definitely a mess. And I mean, we've seen it's interesting because we talked about lobbying, and there are some lobbyists. We've said as far as our previous She Blaze episodes on how much money big cannabis corporations have spent on a federal level to get cannabis passed, and it hasn't been much. But I will say that there are few things that we're really hurting in the cannabis industry that needs to get passed right now. So like the Safe Banking Act, that is a huge thing. It's kind of sad because it's part of the reason why, cannabis businesses didn't really get a small business loan during the COVID relief, even though we've taught you guys ways around that. We still shouldn't have to go around it to be a part of that, because we are essentially $1 billion industry.
And paying taxes. Like, let's be real. At the end of the day, on the state level, cannabis companies pay lots in taxes. And as a result, they should be able to take advantage of what we call emergency relief funding. It's something that I'm certainly fighting for in the state that I can impact. But I think that I'm excited about the newest bill that we see at the top here, which is the Small Business Disaster Relief Equity Act of 2020. It was just introduced both in the Senate, well, not both, but in the Senate. And it was introduced primarily for the simple fact that cannabis companies have not been able to capitalize on federal relief funding. Now, the federal government collects $1.5 billion in taxes from states last year. That money came from the cannabis companies that are working legally within those states. Why is it impossible for now these companies to get relief when they're still contributing? So it's definitely one of those things where I agree with David. It's an essential service and paying taxes. So what are we talking about? Why can't the industry get relief? And that's a bill that we need to watch.
Yeah, right. Watched is going to go dead, because I mean, like, let's hear. Maybe if they try to go into the next session to talk about it, but definitely not happening. But I watch a lot of C-SPAN in my background.
You look like you watch a lot of C-SPAN. You got that.
No, I don't look like it. Come on now, I'm a glamorous girl, honey. But I do watch a lot of what happens on the government because I'm nosy and I want to know the type of politricks they really playing on us. Because we've been talking about the MORE Act, which is the marijuana. Ooh, I can't.
Opportunity, reinvestment, and expungement.
I mean, I mean, listen, I feel like they need to get a little bit cuter with these names personally, because we can forget them real quick.
Oh no, we love the acronym. So we want more. The more ACT gives us more. It gives Black folks, brown folks more. But yes, it's important because the reinvestment part and the expungement part makes this act very different from other marijuana bills that are still live right now that have been introduced. So that's why I want to say, again, go back to congress.gov. You're going to see other decriminalization and legalization bills, but they do not have reinvestment and expungement. Okay.
Yeah, they do not have reinvestment.
I cannot. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I was just gonna say I can't claim to watch C-SPAN with any regularity, but I will agree with you that I don't think much is going to happen on the federal level, at least this year, given, the year of our Lord 2020 and everything that has transpired. But I think the good news is that the state programs, initiatives, legalizations are definitely impacting the federal level, and we have an opportunity to really have our greatest impact on the state level and in our local markets and communities. So we could take the same, skill set that you guys have laid out and make a difference on the state level, which is ultimately when we do legalize federally. And I do believe it's coming. And before ICE goes into menopause, I'm hoping I hope that it'll make it before I have the change of life. But as Dasheeda reminded me, I'm not getting any younger, so we'll see. But at some point, it is going to be legal on the federal level, and they will be taking their cues from state legalization efforts.
I absolutely agree. I think that is probably one of the biggest things is that I really want to play devil's advocate here because I don't think states, the federal government should legalize just yet, even though they're collecting a buku number of taxes from this essential service cannabis. I still, again, just do not trust the people that we have in government to govern it properly. And as we talked about the MORE Act, it's been redone and redid several different times. I mean, at this point, they should add an S onto it or something because, literally, it gets better, obviously, with age, with years, it gets better. But come on, we've been doing it for years and years. So, seeing it at a federal level may not just happen for another 10 years, but states can take it, flip it, and make it their own.
Yes. So just to piggyback that before we start showing, because we got state initiatives that we want to make sure people know about. The reason why these bills are important is like exactly what I say. They don't go away. So this MORE Act of 2019 is going to transition into something that is of 2020. And this understanding of what the base bill was is really important as you do improve on it. I definitely see all of these moving forward, just so folks we talked about SAFE, we talked about MORE, we talked about small business disaster. State Cannabis Commerce Act is about interstate commerce and being able to move cannabis within regions of legalized states. So from Oregon to Cali or Cali to Washington, where those states are already legalized. That's very important when we think about the price of flour, the price of goods, because now you have that impact. And then the last is the Medical Cannabis Research Act of 2019. Again, I always look as well as to where these bills have come out of and what state is pushing it. This was actually sponsored by a Florida congressman, and that's because Florida is the largest medical marijuana state, and they want the University of Florida to be able to also have a DEA license like the University of Mississippi to do research on medical marijuana. And so, of course, they would push it. I'd like to see FAMU also have that license for the record, but I also realize that digging into the bill, there's some impact that everybody, right, who is a university, if you're already doing hemp or you're already doing medical marijuana in your state, you have that opportunity to do some more research. Right now, you can only get a licensed federally licensed marijuana from the University of Mississippi. And according to Dr. Sue Sicily, essentially it's dust. So we do want to make sure, and it still works, by the way, which I think is funny, but we do want to make sure that we're pushing that. So those are our federal initiatives right now that I would say the top 5 you want to watch, and they'll get it, there'll be iterations. The last thing I'll say is that if one passes the House, right, and doesn't pass the Senate, that's still precedent at the state level. So even though, for example, something may pass the House and we know it's not going to go through the Senate, then we still can celebrate it on the state level, use it as a precedent as to why the state should be looking at it.
Okay, well, let's definitely jump into these states that are going to be voting on it in this election that is 17 days away. Yes, people, we are less than a month away from some real interesting turn of events. I mean, depend on what you want to list your countdown as. But adult use actually is a big one this year. New Jersey, which is, like Imani said, a neighbor to New York, they have a question on their ballot. Definitely read on it. We like to use Ballotpedia. Ballotpedia is a great reference so you can see what's the actual question going to be, because sometimes they list these questions to confuse you on purpose. Mm-hmm. Arizona is going to be one of our little areas we're actively at. Now, this is the second time that they've tried to do this adult use. So I am very curious, because we went to a watch party and everything. It was Leafly watch party in 2016. We was all jazzy. They had all their little pop outs and cutouts and balloons just to not even pop it. We're Oklahoma, which I think is pretty quick because honestly they just became medicinal. So I'm very curious to see how Oklahoma is going to do. Believe it or not, Montana has adult use listed on their state ballot, and South Dakota. And why South Dakota is so interesting about adult use on their ballot is because they're also trying to pass medical marijuana at the same time. And it says that if they don't pass the medical marijuana, they can't even move forward with the adult use. So why do they even have it on the ballot?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about this in She Blaze, so definitely if you are binging us on SoundCloud, you want to rewind and head to some of these previous episodes this year, because we take a deep dive into all of these states. Really quickly, I'm most excited about Oklahoma. You want to know why? Because Oklahoma did just legalize medical marijuana, and it's already doing better out the gate than a lot of more legacy medical marijuana states. Why? Because they basically created the super open market, open consumer or patient market, and open business market. You don't have qualifying conditions. Any doctor can confer with their patient and decide that a medical marijuana card is what is best. And you can see it by the fact that they've captured already 9% of the total state, not 9% of just what we think are the sick people that qualify for a condition, but the total state. And by that it makes it a very large endeavor. If we did that by in Oregon, for example, we would actually be, quadrupling the current status of the medical program. So it's very impactful how many patients sign up. But then, as is listed, and yes, shout out to M4MM that just said this, we got 2,500 dispensaries and growing in Oklahoma. So there are no dry areas at all.
Could you imagine if that was New York City?
Exactly. Listen, I said that New York City needs to pay attention.
New York State, even?
They need to pay attention, because we've been in Cali, and Cali is like the holy grail supposedly of cannabis. But let's be real, the legal market is very dry, not just in the flower being dry, but also in how many locations are dry. You have to drive 30 minutes to wait in a long line, and they may not have good quality product on the shelves available for you. So no, I agree. I think I'm excited about Oklahoma, but Mani is right. New Jersey is about to set some precedent, because if they do it, now we got to worry about big states like New York, big legacy market states like New York, and Pennsylvania, which are flanking the two with New Jersey. So I think it's going to happen. I'm a registered voter in New Jersey, so I'm going to say this, like, I think it's going to happen.
Bloop.
Okay, well.
So our M for MM family actually asked a question about Arizona that I think is that, you know, if we can address, we definitely should. Do they have a social equity commitment on the books for their adult use legislation?
Well, let's put air quotes around social equity. I would say that they are attempting to address the lack of diversity in size and in racial diversity of ownership within the space. And there are avenues that they've, you know, outlined, but a lot of people don't like the bill necessarily. Unless you're already in the industry, a lot of people who are already in the industry in Arizona, because it has a very large medical marijuana industry here, they're participating and they are part of the coalition. As I said, coalitions push referendum bills. They're part of the coalition on the ground that pushed this bill. What Arizona lacks is more input from the indigenous population here, more input from the Hispanic population here, because by and large, they're the ones that are missing the opportunity for reinvestment. There isn't a reinvestment of the cannabis tax revenue. There isn't an addressing expungement or any of the past crimes, if you will, related to marijuana possession. So I say they have really scratched the surface, barely, like, scratch the surface, and there's going to still be a need for more done. And I think that's where the activists need to get here on the ground and ensure that there's more education, because that's what it is. The people are not educated. They think, oh, well, we're just making it legal because it's going to make the state more money. And that's really more or less the story. And more people who are sick, older people, will actually get to participate. I like that story, and I think that that's true. But there's also an undercurrent, which is we've, disproportionately arrested Black, Indigenous, and Hispanic populations in the state. Currently, there are still many that are incarcerated as a result of this, and we've done nothing to support those communities, reinvest back into those communities. We've done nothing with the cannabis tax revenue to date, which is plentiful. So they've got a lot to atone for. I just don't know if the state is pushing for it. The advocates are not pushing for it on the ground. Not enough.
Well, it's hard too, because we just talked about how much money is backed in running for things, putting initiatives on things, talking to your different state legislator. It's a lot of money. So if the money doesn't want to do it because it may mess with their money, then can you put that in your initiative? I don't know.
True. Listen, it comes down to what we talked about. We've been talking about this strategically in an order. We explain lobbying first because we know that that is what is the push and pull, and it is driving a lot of the decision making that's happening on the Hill, on the federal, state, and local level. And in truth, it is part of what's behind some of these referendum initiatives, is really how much money can you put behind it. And oftentimes that's done, like I said, through local coalitions. We're part of Start Smart New York. And we participated and worked with Oklahomans for Health, for example, when we brought Cease to Oklahoma as they were legalizing medical. And yes, and obviously you talked about what happened with Atlanta and how things are in Georgia, but the Georgia Cannabis Coalition is another group that is on the ground pushing for both local and state changes for cannabis across the board. So these are just examples, and there are so many of them, but you can also start your own coalition, and that's simply by having multiple organizations say, hey, we stand for this together, and we want to push this bill forward together.
Absolutely. And I think that is really important, because we see the progress on the state and city level. We have some upcoming and past things that people can try to look and see if it works in their area as well.
That's true. Real quick, just so folks know, medical marijuana is also on these ballot initiatives as well in Mississippi and in South Dakota. So again, we're not talking about the usual suspect states. Sometimes people expect to hear these big states that have large urban populations and the same that way. But the fact that Mississippi is finally talking about medical marijuana, it tells me that we as people of color need to really start paying attention, because we now talk about areas where we are a large percentage, and we're also an extremely large percentage of those that are arrested, harassed, and receive the most negative outcome from prohibition.
Yes, and you could go and watch that on She Blaze, because we definitely went through all of the states that are going to be voting on adult use and medical marijuana. So yes, some of the upcoming bills are in New York, which is a big deal. Marijuana regulation and taxation. Kentucky, believe it or not, is having an upcoming medical marijuana bill. And if it is a hot mess in Kentucky right now. So it's going to be really important for you guys to watch out for that. And believe it or not, Oregon actually has a cannabis equity bill coming up, because people are caring about what we're doing with the revenue that we're getting from cannabis legalization.
Among many things, but really quickly, what ICE didn't say is these are legislative initiatives. So what's the difference? The referendum are the ones that the people vote on when there is an election time period. A legislative initiative can happen every year during any session. And it is something that has to move through the legislative arm of the government. So it can move through the legislative arm of the federal government, but in this case, we're talking about the legislative arm of the state government. The Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, speaking of bills that have been around for a long time, was introduced now almost 7 years ago by the Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes, and it has had several versions. As she learns, as the coalition learns, it gets updated, and these are the type of bills that will continue to keep coming back to session, because I think New York does want to legalize it, but the coalition on the ground is very keen on it legalizing with equitable access and some sort of reinvestment back into communities that have been harmed. But you're right, Kentucky's bill is a real doozy, because Black folk don't represent a large percentage necessarily of the whole state. And so it becomes really hard sometimes for our voices to be heard when we're that way. But we do represent a very large percentage of those incarcerated in the state of Kentucky around marijuana. And so this medical house bill right now doesn't have any of the good stuff, if you will, that represents showing social justice, showing some sort of equity in the industry. And I got to give a shout out to Oregon, because this is a bill that I'm currently actively working on. We are excited. We can't share too many details now, but you should look for a very transformative cannabis equity bill to be in the Oregon market. And I think it's going to set precedent that's very important.
Yes, and we have some past examples of how bills have gotten pushed through the state level, as far as Illinois. Now, when Illinois became legal, they did it through their state legislative. Virginia, I guess they're feeling a lot of pressure due to Maryland and DC, because Virginia at least is like, we got to decriminalize it, because I mean, one, no one can tell the difference between real cannabis or THC, high THC cannabis and hemp. So like, you're spending a lot of money on trying to do the different testing to prove the difference. And then two, again, just locking up a lot of people coming from that Maryland and that DC area just is not a good look. Locally, we see cities taking on actions of decriminalizing the possession of cannabis, i.e. Atlanta, Georgia. Only the city of Atlanta. If you leave and go to Clayton County, you are going to go to jail. Austin, Texas, decriminalizing possession as well. So if you're in Austin, you're good. But if you're on your way to Dallas, not so much.
You are hilarious, but that's facts. The thing in Georgia is so real. They do not care what happened in Fulton County or in Atlanta. If you are in Clayton County, you will go to jail. So this is the issue that I have, because that's when it starts to feel like Hunger Games, right? Because it's like, what district am I in right now in order for me to have my medicine? I think that's crazy. I'm just being real, but I think that's why we have to also know the precedent. So if you're in Clayton County, know that Atlanta or Fulton County has on books precedent for decriminalization, and so you bring that over. It's really important for us to recognize that opportunity.
First of all, if anybody says Clayco, I'm gonna need y'all Clayton County. I'm gonna need a Clayco behind you, so I know it's real. Okay.
I'm trying to be professional here, girl.
I see Southern roots.
Trying to be professional. Okay, they don't need to know how I get down when I squat up. You see my fancy shirt? I really came not to play today.
Oh my God. Yes, you with your ruffled shirt. Teacher Ice today. So let's get into what I think in this last few minutes of our workshop. We got to really talk about what's really most important, because we've been really broadly, we brought it really down to some of those legislative initiatives, some of the referendums coming up, but even after election, right? After the 17 days, we will still be doing cannabis advocacy, and it will move from 2020 into 2021. And I want to make sure that everybody is prepared. And so we've outlined top 10 cannabis initiatives that we think folks need to know in order for us to actually move the needle. So we're going to talk about it, because it's like a round robin. We're going to quickly talk about why it's important. The first, I have to say it because M4MM asked about it for Arizona, but yeah, the first is we want to create social equity centered licensing and regulation. So when we stand up a new industry, when we legalize, it should be with social equity as the center point, but instead you get the money as the center point. So that's why I think that's a really, really important one. What are y'all thoughts?
I think it is a huge, important aspect of cannabis legalization, because I mean, honestly, there's not enough diversity in the people that are getting licensed or having license, and the regulation. It also needs to be when you also say social equity, it has to be affordable too, because there are a lot of social equity that's considered low income that won't even be able to play and pay to play.
So please ignore the dance break going on behind me and the soundtrack, which I have no control over. But I like to tell my clients that if we don't investing in social equity, because the reality is, in a capitalist society, large companies devour the smaller ones, right? Mm-hmm. So everyone is vulnerable at a certain level. And by protecting the most vulnerable, which to me indicates the people who've been most harmed by the disparate enforcement that Dasheeda mentioned earlier, we are really protecting ourselves. We have a vested interest in making sure it's an inclusive table, so it doesn't just get taken over by whichever company emerges as the Walmart of weed. It just makes sense. And that's why the most effective companies and individuals in the space have also been vocal advocates for both social equity and social justice.
That's so true. I don't know. I think that it's much bigger than even the term social equity. I use it because that's what everyone knows, and it's a little bit more of a buzzword. But I think cannabis equity is a lot broader than just licensing. It is about that tax revenue, is about reinvesting in the individual, the family, and the community. And that is, to me, the number one thing, though, whenever we have new initiatives. If you're coming to the table and you're participating, you should be asking, as they're talking about legalizing, well, how are we going to make sure that Black and brown folks have a pathway into the industry that has sustainability? Because that's what Imani is talking about, the ability to stay and not be eaten up by larger companies. The other thing that I got to say, Ice, did you want to say something more about social equity?
Oh, no. Mm-mm.
Okay. I was going to move right into the next one, which I feel is so important for the medical industry to be successful. But we need to have, I think, no restrictions. But if you are hell-bent on having restrictions, make sure that they're expanded. It shouldn't be that you are almost dying to be able to get a certification or qualification for medical cannabis. The fact of the matter is, we just talked about Oklahoma. They have no restrictions. It simply is at the opinion of the medical profession in partnership with that patient. So if the patient is like, yo, I think I need weed, and the doctor should hopefully be able to say, let's talk about that. They figure it out, and then they get their qualification. The more we have available for qualifications, the more consumers you have for your market. If you have limited qualifications, like in Minnesota and even in New York, that's why New York, for the longest time, large as the market should be, it didn't even have 50,000 patients. It just went over 100K patients. By difference, Arizona has doubled the number of patients.
Right.
So,
well, I think it's definitely something to say about having restrictions on what you consider is medical cannabis qualifying, because ultimately we know in today's society, with having even autoimmune issues, that if they can't see it, they don't know what you're dealing with. Even on a mental health perspective, like a lot of people deal with things mentally, and if a doctor can't see it, they can't see what's going on with your brain, they can't understand it, so they're like, oh no, well, that's not real. It's at fault. And again, cannabis is medicine, so if it's just a basic aspirin, anybody could buy ibuprofen, anybody could buy aspirin. So we definitely have to consider medical cannabis along those lines to make it everyone should be able to get it, whether they have an ailment or not. Maybe they don't want to get ailments and they come from a family rigged with a sickness.
Yes, because it is preventative in its regimen. You're absolutely right, Ice. I don't think you should have to be sick to get it. And that's sort of what the premise is, 110%.
Well, just being in this space has taught me so much about the endocannabinoid system and how cannabinoids are really represent medicine that is complementary to the body and so many functions. So in that way, it is a plant-based medicine that, to you guys' point, everyone should have access to, provided that their medical professional agrees, So I love the Oklahoma approach. I never thought I would say that Oklahoma has topped New York in something, but yeah, they definitely got that.
Well, shout out to the Dawson Sisters for going down there and scoping it out, you know what I'm saying? Well, really, Dasheeda, because she was like, we're doing a conference in Oklahoma, and we was like, where? Where we going?
That's why y'all pay me the big bucks.
LOL. But I also think that the next point that we have as far as include cannabis tax revenue and reinvestment, it kind of also goes into the thing you said about cannabis equity. Our revenue, cannabis is $1 billion industry. And it also just reminds you that your taxes in general revenue, where is it going? But specifically your cannabis tax revenue, where is it going? You want to see that it's going to your community.
Yes.
But
you going to tell the tea about where it's been going?
Well, no, I wasn't going to tell the tea about where it's been going, but I was going to tell the tea on the next point, which is like ban the municipalities opting in and out of cannabis businesses, because the real tea is that if they opt out, you don't even get that revenue. How about that?
That's so true. So those are both connected. The cannabis tax revenue, by and large, just so you know, check your state, check your local municipality, is probably going to your police bureau, because they do still control quite a bit of the overall revenue for city, state, and federal. I agree with you. The cannabis tax revenue reinvestment is key, which gives me an opportunity to quickly plug the Social Equity and Educational Development Grant Fund, or the SEED Grant Fund, that I just launched in the city of Portland, where we have $1 million ongoing that is coming from cannabis tax revenue from the city level that will be reinvested into restorative justice and economic development and education within Black and Brown communities. So it's the first of its kind. What'd you say?
I said that's major.
Yes, I got it. Thank you.
Well, yeah, if Portland ever stop burning, maybe, more people want to move out there. Shoot.
I know that's right. Well, she made them put their money where their mouth is.
Well, to be honest, they have been putting their money where their mouth is for some time, but not to this level. Happy to take it to a 7-figure amount to start seed initiatives in total. This year, we'll have $800K available in grants, and $200K is going to be utilized for basically minority and women business enterprises in a contract format to support our grant recipients in a technical assistance program. So all of this is relatively new, that aspect of it for the city of Portland. But what makes it unique is that it is all part of the cannabis program. The cannabis program, the regulatory program, it never before will be seen in the United States where there is a regulatory program that does the licensing and the compliance piece of it, but also is standing up reinvestment and equity components of this nature. And to get a grant is not necessarily to say, oh, I'm getting a grant so I can start a cannabis business. You can, and certainly you can apply for that, but these are meant to really be grants for Black and brown folks who are leading initiatives that are going to impact Black and brown communities in a positive way. So that might be in education, that might be in entrepreneurship and economic development, and that might be in expungement. So it's about coming with the ideas and being, I would say, creative about what we think is equity, but it starts with using this money in a positive way versus just sending it right back to the police bureau that actually incarcerated the very community that we're talking about.
Right, definitely. Well, I mean, absolutely doing some big things there. And hopefully it might spark a migration out west so they could get even more Black and brown folks. Because, when Black people are like, oh, they give away free money, they try to figure out how to go and move there.
Listen, that's facts. And the fact of the matter is that is the case. I will also just leave it at, you don't have to be a Portland-based business or initiative to apply, but the work that you are proposing needs to be able to impact the city of Portland's community. So, sometimes there are national initiatives that are like, let's go in there and test some things and get some new ideas out before we roll it out in bigger states. I know for me, it's been very exciting just to do this work, sets a precedent, and we could say to Governor Cuomo, guess what? We got other places doing it, and the market's doing better as a result.
Well, that is dope. And I don't think they have that many banned municipalities out in Oregon. Whereas if you look at Michigan, most of their municipalities opted out. California, most of their municipalities opt out. So we have to make sure we write this in whatever, referendum or initiative we are trying to spark for cannabis. We have to be specific that, listen, y'all cannot opt out because every city, every town, every place needs to have cannabis businesses.
That's actually a real good point for Black and Hispanic leaders, because oftentimes they're the ones pushing for the opt-out, a lot of times based on some of the religious leaders' objection to the cannabis legalization. And all you're doing is robbing your communities of revenue that would be driven, because in places like Oregon, if you opt out, guess what? You're opting out of the cannabis tax revenue allocation as well, which, by the way, in Oregon, just a small state, has generated over $150 million year to date.
Okay. And I think the opt-out is a great way to move to preventing banned flowers in the cannabis market. Now, Imani, I know you could relate in New York State because y'all don't got no flower, nothing.
This program, I will just say this. My state has many things to recommend it, like staying alive during COVID-19, but the medical cannabis market is sadly not one of them.
There's a lot of expensive oils. We can name a lot of different markets, and I don't think this is just for the adult use, but it's really for the medical cannabis markets as well. Flower is important. When you ban flower, you are literally eliminating what is currently 35 to 40% of most mature markets. That, as a business sense, is just a terrible decision, because that is revenue loss. That is the legacy market continuing to persist. You wondering why the legacy market is still around? Why? Because I can't get flower from the dispensary. I got to still hit up my man. And that I think ultimately is one of the most obvious reasons, whether you support cannabis legalization or not, that you shouldn't ban flower. But it, to me, is based in something so stupid. Like you said earlier, it's based on two things. First is people are still like, they see hemp flower or marijuana flower, they're freaked out, right? Like, it's like, oh my God, it's the devil's lettuce. And so the look of it, it's like, oh, we got to keep it behind closed doors. We don't want nobody to see it. We're like, what? That's not what we are experiencing with any other consumer product or any other medicinal product, nutraceutical product. We don't experience that at all. And then the second thing is that the banning of flower, in some ways, I feel like is under this erroneous thought that one, you only can consume flower by smoking it. And we're trying to prevent people from smoking it and hurting their lungs, which, by the way, there's no scientific evidence of that either, as far as the cannabis flower is concerned. I just think that we need to do better. We need to use real science and understand what are fear-based laws versus ones that are based in the truth of how one consumers are buying. 35 to 40% of the market is flower. This is where people are most comfortable entering the market before they try a more concentrated version in a vape or in a dab or in a pen or what have you, or in an edible.
Yes, and I think you make a great point where we can move to our next initiative we really care about is normalizing professional use of medical and adult use cannabis. Oh my God, like seriously, it's not that big of a deal if you use cannabis. Like, get over it.
Says the baby of the family. I totally get it. But some of us are traumatized, child. We have watched our friends getting literally dropped down to the ground by 4 or 5 different police officers just because they smell like it. People automatically assuming that you can't do your job, fired on the spot, walked out the building. These are the type of things that I know I've experienced in my over 40 years of life here.
I mean, we still seeing it, to be fair.
Yes, and we're still seeing it. But I do think that that's why I came out the closet. That's why I developed the WeedHead, because I wanted to be clear that as a cannabis patient, it did not impact negatively, certainly didn't impact my professional capabilities. If anything, it positively impacts it, because if you knew what these early signs of MS was actually doing to my body, you would understand that I would not be able to get up every day and lead the initiatives and do the work that we do without a cannabinoid treatment. It just is the case. But I give a new face to it.
I think it's particularly important to normalize it, because the reality is that the people that are most hurt by this sort of attitude that cannabis is bad are the most vulnerable in our society. So people who are in federal housing, for example, or public housing that could lose their housing, or people for whom, whatever administrative bureau for children's services is in your town, if you get tested, like in New York, they disproportionately test poor mothers. And if you have any cannabis in your system, you could lose custody of your children. So I applaud you for taking a stand and being a pioneer and being like, hey, cannabis helps me live a better life. It is not something that has destroyed my ability to be a professional, has actually enhanced it, because I mostly don't believe in trickle down, but this is a situation where it definitely helps people that may not have the platform, may not have the language or the resources to be like, hey, cannabis is important, it helps me too, and they are being criminalized.
Absolutely.
And I think you make a great point. So let's move to our next initiative, ban pre-employment drug tests. But now you got me feeling like, Imani, man, let's just ban all these drug tests.
I agree. I mean, I don't think that drug use should be criminalized and should be stigmatized in the way that it has been. I think that we should be looking more with a side eye at our drug treatment in the United States and among our state and local levels. But this is something that passed in New York City with the Start Smart Coalition at the lead, DPA. Pre-employment drug test is a real reason why, especially Black and brown or low income individuals are either without their their medication, or B, if they are using, they are at risk of losing their job, especially when they're random, and especially when it doesn't require, like, there's no reason that you would need a random drug test other than just trying to be in somebody's business. But
no,
yes,
not unless you're operating like heavy machinery or
exactly.
something where any sort of impairment state would put you or other people in, in harm's way. I completely agree with you. There's really no need for drug testing. I mean, a lot of it has to do with how Black and brown communities are criminalized, because we can see even the discrepancy. And, Dasheeda, since you and I are old enough to remember the crack era, how people who were struggling with crack addiction were treated versus people who are struggling with opioid addiction. And we know that a lot of what's behind it is, the prohibition laws that are rooted in racism, and it's time to erase them.
Yes, but the real joke of it is that those type of drugs don't even stay in your system long. The joke is that cannabis is the only thing that really stays in your system up to more than 30 days because your body needs it. So it's like, are y'all really trying to check to see if I'm a brackhead or not? Because it goes in and out real quick.
That's true. I mean,
I reason to keep you from the job, girl.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ice. The test is very biased for the things that do stay in your system. And marijuana, as compared to cocaine, for example, marijuana has the endocannabinoid system. It has storage capabilities within your body. It's very clear. And cocaine is literally so toxic, we can't wait to metabolize it to get it out of our body. And that's why it's so fast acting. But I think we could probably debate a lot of different reasons why drug tests, period, need to go away. And I'm excited about some of the bills that we have going on in Oregon based on some of these things. But I also think how we get our cannabis, especially with COVID, has sort of, now highlighted the need for ability to deliver and have contactless dispensing and the like. And so that's something we added here in the cannabis initiatives, that top 10. I think delivery also means that we get more of a legacy market, because quiet as it's kept, people think that everybody in the legacy market is growing their own flower. No, most people in the legacy market are distribution hubs, delivery. They're getting the flower from somewhere, they're getting the product from somewhere, and then they're distributing it to their network of individuals direct to consumer. That is a delivery model that is just waiting to happen. And I sort of feel like places that have tried to keep the delivery model out is really because they want to keep the legacy market out.
That's right. Well, now that you say that, should we be allowing social consumption, or should it be specific to not getting ticketed for smoking outside as a social consumption?
I think that it's the both, right? But I agree that social.
I don't know. With COVID, I don't want to share my blunts.
It's not about sharing. Nobody said you have to share. You're sharing a space, and you can still have the same distance requirements. But the other issue with social consumption is there are a lot of places, if you live in public housing and yet you can't smoke on the street, where do you smoke? Where do you consume? Again, social consumption not being allowed is a disadvantage for those that are Black and brown and or low income, poor, immigrant. Like the list goes on. It's still one of those situations where those who are marginalized bear the brunt of it. But I believe that social consumption can be done responsibly, and it doesn't have to
point out that I'm not saying that we'll ever go back to like hugging people that we don't already know and love, but like there will be some sort of life beyond COVID-19. Eventually, we will have competent leadership and be able to get a handle on it, which means that there will be opportunities for socialization and social consumption.
I agree.
One day.
One day. But the last thing that I guess I'll bring up, Ice, what you was going to say?
I said we cross our fingers.
Okay, yes. Cross our fingers and our toes. Yes, and cast our votes. Be active, because part of it is the crossing the fingers ain't doing it, child. Like real talk, we got to get to the streets and actually be advocating for it. So the last thing I will say, which might be the most important, is that we currently have a lot of trifurcated regulatory systems in our country around hemp, medical cannabis, and adult use cannabis, and it don't make no sense. Hemp and marijuana are both cannabis. They are both part of the same genus, and rightfully so. They should be governed and or regulated under one system, as opposed to this trifurcated. We've made it a man-made, separation. Hemp, as a reminder for everybody, has basically all of the same molecular makeup as marijuana. The difference is that it has to have less than 0.3% THC. And now the DEA has made some interim final rules, which we reported on in an earlier episode of She Blaze, that has made it even more complicated as you make hemp products. But by and large, that's the biggest difference. And some places, like the World Health Organization, they classify hemp as 0.2% less than THC. So we don't need that level of separation. That is really about, again, the fear mongering, scare tactics around marijuana. It's about Kentucky being the hemp capital of the country, and Mitch McConnell and his cronies essentially pushing that marijuana is still bad cannabis and hemp is the good cannabis. No, we're not going to do that. As a scientist, I just have that. It's a difficult thing for me to accept that we're not able to recognize that these need to be all regulated together.
I think you've made some good points, and now it's got me all amped up, and I'm ready to start some initiations within my community. But how does that happen? Well, we're giving you some guides to how to create a model legislation around cannabis.
Yes, and this is one of those things where we can't go into it. It's its own class, to be perfectly honest, and its own class for a while, I'm sure. But model legislation is really important and has been part of this advocacy experience that we've had for some time. Essentially, what I feel like we just want to have as a takeaway is that it is a multi-step process. Most people are not able to just go in and do a copy and paste. You don't want to plagiarize a model legislation, right? You maybe some parts you want to use as precedent and get that language, but ultimately it will have to be some tweaking. So just really quickly, some of these important steps, we want to identify the initiatives, which we just outlined for you. There's a way to look at things as a new law versus an amendment. When we talked about the MORE Act, there's been several amendments to the MORE Act, several amendments to the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act in New York, for example. And so there's importance to recognize, what are you trying to do out the gate? You said, what did you want to say, Ice?
I said yes.
Yes. The second thing is, people often confuse legislation with regulation. When we are having New Jersey on the ballot initiative and you got to vote for it, that is passing legislation. But there's still quite a bit of regulation that needs to be created, policies that need to be created, and you can actually create model policy that can be leveraged in the regulatory framework, which is different process than this picture and a different process than model legislation. Oftentimes that will go to the office that is managing it. So if we did model policy for the cannabis program in the city of Portland, it would have to go through the cannabis policy oversight team, get reviewed, and so on and so forth. So that's some of the differences.
And it does.
What's the word on the street for?
Sorry. What'd you say? What's the word on the street for?
No, for regulation in New Jersey. This would be a great time to just share some high-level insight. If you have, it's going to look like. I know that's something that, they parried back and forth, and ultimately why they kicked it off to a referendum to let the voters decide just over legislation. So just wondering if you'd heard anything.
Oh, we have. And actually, we did a deep dive in a previous episode where we outlined some of those things. So we definitely want you to go check that out, folks. But what I will say, the top three things is that we know what the, the tax rate is going to be. We also know that there's going to be a commission that is formed that's going to oversee the regulatory framework building and monitoring. And we know that there is going to be equity components, but there's still a lot of details that need to be figured out after the fact.
Right.
Unlike, for example, Arizona, their referendum is literally spells out how it's going to be regulated as well. So there's two different ways to approach it. New Jersey decided to do the general and like a little bit more easy, more so, do you think it should be legal or not? And Arizona basically was like, do you think it should be legal or not? And if yes, do you agree that it should also be legalized this way? And
Right.
on these lists. So yeah.
And you find that both of them are imperfect. Whether you do it with super detail and you find out, 3 years later, this actually does not work for our state, or it's like you have a very general question and then you allow your leaders to create a framework that still don't work for your state. So again, it's really about finding the balance. And I think moving into the second most important step is brainstorming, creating, and writing the legislative concepts. Now, it takes weeks, months, and shoot, it might take years, depending on what state you live in, to really create something that has both of those balances. I think it's about finding balance within the cannabis progression.
That's facts. I mean, and you honestly, I wouldn't try this individually, but there might be people where you don't have a choice and you're just getting started. That's why I think it's good to look at precedent and start to maybe pull from other states their concepts, but you might have to adjust it based on what's happening with your locale. So you can do it individually, but where I've seen it and where we've seen it, where we participated, has been more in a coalition or a work group. Oftentimes, these coalitions and work groups will have with it, although it's not a official sponsorship, but a legislative leader that is going to help guide it through to introduction as real legislation. So, there are options. There's also policy summits. We participated in the MCBA one, and it was very much not for a show. We didn't have an audience, but we literally just worked in work groups where we came up with really important ideas around specific concepts or areas that fit into one large legislation, because legislation often has multiple parts, and you might not be the expert on one part, but you are on another, and that's the way those summits tend to work.
Yes. And then we have consult with legal legislator or policy analysts. Now, these people also may not be well versed in cannabis. So when you are consulting with them, you're really consulting with them like, hey, does this make sense? Does this follow the letter of the law? You're not consulting with them on ounces versus pounds because they don't know. So just to be clear about how you're consulting with legal outside of the cannabis industry, they don't know what you know. They have to be educated. But what they do know is how a bill should be written. How is it an amendment versus a whole new doggone law? So let's just, keep that in perspective, because there's going to be a bunch of drafts and written over and over. It may take years, as you said, in New York, it's taken several to get some things passed.
That's so true. The last I'll say is in the drafts, we usually have preferred versus contingencies. You got to expect opposition and you want to anticipate it. And that's where the policy analysts and the legislators are really great partners, because they'll let you know who previously opposed something or whose policies typically will not, be aligned, and how do you address it? And sometimes you address it by, standing firm and saying, nope, we're not budging. Sometimes you have to have a contingency that you can offer up in the negotiation to get a policy or a new legislation introduced.
Yes. And then finally, because we are pressing the end of this thing for real, is, present the model legislation to allied legislators. Get it introduced or even sponsored, but you got to understand that both of these things must pass. So, with that, we want to really, really help you guys, and hope you guys downloaded it off the WeedHead.com so you guys could get in and use it and really see what you could do within your state or your city to bring cannabis forward.
So yes, you're right. We are pressing against the time. This was what we call a special episode, nearly double the time. Thank you guys who stayed on with us. And if you're listening and you press pause, hopefully you're coming back at the right point. Here we have our additional resources. But last but not least, I'm giving our information because obviously we've done these things and we want to continue to be a resource for folks. And so this last slide is where you can find us. And, I always, I guess, am the same. You can find me at Dasheeda Dawson on IG or Twitter, or at theweedhead.com with me and the company.
Yes, Imani, tell them where they can find you.
Sure. You can find me at Imani Dawson on Instagram or Twitter, and also at Tribe Called Curl, and Imani at tccmedia.co. That's co, not com.
Yes, ma'am. And the Twitter, Tribe Called Curl Twitter is hilarious. So I do suggest you go ahead and follow it because the shade is always real on there. And you can always follow me, listen to me, watch me. I am CannabisSocialite on IG. Ooh, that's new. And then you can follow She Blaze on Instagram and Facebook. And I do have my email, but you can maybe not email me and just, leave it at that. But listen to us anytime on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, we everywhere. And thank you guys for joining with us for a very special, long episode. It's important because we got 17 days to, make some shake. But after that, we can still do some great things.
That's so
thank
true.
You for letting me play in the sandbox with you guys today. This was
never again.
This was getting. How I get mad that quick? Dang. Okay. I was just gonna say this was like a college seminar, so people might need to listen to this one a couple times just to get all in.
I agree. Plus, you can't get enough of us, sure.
Yes. And apparently, I'm never gonna be invited back. If you want to hear from me, you're gonna have to watch it a couple times.
Oh my goodness. Well, I've enjoyed it. Imani, thank you so much for joining us for this special episode. And Ice, as always, thank you for sparking the fun ideas that we get to do as sisters and encouraging us to encourage other people to get their civic life. I can't wait to see what we do next. And I look forward to another week with you guys.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Everybody have a great week. Bye.